All right, hello everyone. We're starting our first of several lectures on the European Middle Ages. This is going to take most of November and December here in class. So, if we remember, we took a short jaunt through Islam, Byzantium, and Japan. We left the Roman Empire around the year 400, still cooking very much in the East, but the West has kind of disintegrated and fragmented into all these smaller units as these invasions of one after another of Germanic tribes have swept through here. So we're going to have everything in yellow on these PowerPoints. So we're going to kind of get general and then start to get into the content of what we want to talk about here. So when we have the Roman Empire, specifically, we want to make sure that we're very much focused on understanding the Roman Empire in the West under Rome. Remember, Diocletian has divided that empire. The East is still going to be cooking. I mean, you can make the case that the Roman Empire, if you want, if you're Romanian, you might say it's still around today. It's going to keep going all the way up through, I mean, into the 20th century, you could make an argument for. So when we're talking about the capstone, we're talking about Rome. So when Rome begins to crumble in the West, so does that empire that the Romans have built up in the West as well begun there. So what we see here is that as that empire is being torn apart and being run, it very much is leaving a couple of things still left behind that become the foundations for what will become medieval Europe. So first is we have the spirit of Christianity. Like we saw with our rise of the Islamic armies conquering and expanding in the Middle East and out, the spirit of Christianity is going to act as a unifying force for most, if not all, people of Europe from again that year 400 to whenever you want to call an end to the Middle Ages. So the spirit of Christianity very much makes it for a common experience that everybody's going to kind of go in their day-to-day life with. Whether you're a peasant in Spain on the Atlantic coast or you're a peasant in Russia in the Urals, your existence is going to kind of run through this Christian church and the calendar, and you have this to fall back on, which is something that we'll see time and time again, this Christianity bringing together a common experience of most Europeans. We've already talked about this extensively, that the legacy of Greece and Rome is going to bring this idea of progress to the medieval Europeans. In this idea that you can work to be able to improve your current situation. Your current situation doesn't have to be what it is. And this belief that things will incrementally get better, progress with the capital P, that society is always going to kind of work towards a higher, whatever have you, how you want to describe that, and you can improve yourself in what you're going and doing. The third major idea is that we talked about with this the energy of these Germanic tribes that are going to be coming and sweeping through Europe. And it's these energy of Germanic tribes that are bringing their again, that have been slowly Christianized, but they're still kind of on the outskirts. They're still have their pagan, almost Viking beliefs, if you want to say that. They're bringing this to this self-sufficiency, that your survival is in your hands. We've seen the Greeks and the Romans very much working together communally, whereas these Germanic peoples are bringing this flux and this energy of self-sufficiency, of doing it yourself. How do we make progress? You don't need a government. You can just go and do it yourself. And what we'll see is these three main ideas aren't going to come together and marry very easily throughout the period of, again, about this 1,000 years we're covering in European history. So when we talk about the Middle Ages, we can talk about ideas such as the kind of some C words Charlemagne will get to, castles, crusades, cathedrals, Christianity are all some of the big kind of things we're doing out. But very much we want to understand that there's a romantic view of the Middle Ages, one that you'll get from going to medieval times or what you might see in movies and television shows, one of chivalrous knights rescuing fair maidens, courtly love, and this idea of respect towards all these people. But that's more of almost, you can make an argument that's a quotation marks romantic movement that we'll see in the early 1800s trying to romanticize this area of the past, because the reality is obviously going to be much different of a life filled with disease, isolation, filth, and fear. And so what we're trying to get through in this unit is try to understand how we get the idea of this romantic vision of this time period today versus what the actual reality in the archaeological and historical record actually was. So first thing we want to understand is, again, we left off with our history of Rome, particularly in the western half of the empire, where Rome is being conquered by these Germanic peoples, and so we want to kind of pick up the story from where those invasions have taken place and what's moving forward. But first, we want to ask a pretty simple question: why are the Middle Ages called the Middle Ages? If we're talking about something being in the middle, that means, I mean, grammatically, just by the word itself, there has to be something that comes before it and that comes after it. And what we want to understand is that the term Middle Ages, I mean, even amongst medieval historians, this is kind of a very much fraught debate. But again, for our purposes as a freshman world history class, we want to, it helps us chunkify world history a little bit more, but very much this is a invention that takes place after the Middle Ages has already occurred. This is something where scholars in and after the Renaissance are taking and looking at all the cool new discoveries that they're coming up with of Plato, of Aristotle, of Socrates, of all these great Greek and Roman thinkers, and looking at all the achievements of ancient Rome, looking at the present time of taking those Greco-Roman ideas and expanding upon what's going on there, and looking at everything in the middle. It's this other thing. It's different. It's not what came before. It's not what's in present. It's the middle. And so this is very much an invention of historians and writers of the Renaissance and after. No one's waking up in the Middle Ages stretching and saying, "Oh, another great February here in the Middle Ages." So make sure this is a historical term, not so much a contemporaneous term that the people are thinking about. So to get on with our story here, what's the aftermath of the fall of Rome? The Germanic and barbarian invasions, why are they invading? They're after cash money. Okay, so where's all the cash money in Rome? We talked about this. The one key idea of Roman civilization is its urbanization. So where is all that wealth and money? It's in the urban world. It's in those cities. So that's where they're going. Therefore, if you want to try to save any of your money and your cash, you want to get the heck out of those cities because that's where we're going. So these Germanic and barbarian invasions, it's not so much they're deconstructing these towns and brick by brick. It's this whole idea of this urban society that was built by the Romans has been taken away and been picked apart at its core, and everybody has kind of figured out that that's where everybody's attacking. So let's go and move out away from everybody else into the countryside where it can kind of protect our own individual selves a little bit more. With the urban society falling apart, that's going to lead to trade declining. And so what we see here is that roads and cities and bridges that help bring everybody together, if everybody's no longer trading amongst these urban centers that don't exist anymore, then those connections that the Romans built start to fall apart, start to move around. So that makes it harder to trade. If it's harder to trade, you're going to become more self-sufficient, which is going to make it even more unlikely for you to trade, and becomes this kind of vicious cycle. Over time, we see a general collapse of overall law and order. There is no longer a Roman imperial army. There are no legions to back up and go and help you out there. So therefore, what we see is a collapse in law and order. And so what we see this. Now, we're going to kind of get into some fraught terms and the historical arguments here. But what we're trying to understand is that from a top-down viewpoint, there is no overarching European wide organization like we saw in um, with the Roman Empire that's providing these services to people. So you've got to work out for yourself. So it's not that there's stopping of education. That's why Dark Ages is in quotation marks. It's not that we're stopping this money, is that we're seeing less use of it. People have to go through this. So we're kind of, it's very much, if you can't see my hands, kind of ebbing and flowing. We've kind of reached a little bit of a decline in the amount of formal education of people. It's not that education has totally gone away. It's just that we're learning things in different ways as the Europeans are figuring out ways to be able to reestablish some sort of order from this period of fragmentation and invasions. That's going to come out of the chaos that has been the tumult of Rome, particularly in Western Europe, particularly in France and Germany, is going to come from a family of rulers called the Merovingians. So if we're again trying to chunkify the history of France, Germany, Western Europe, we can talk about the Merovingian age that comes kind of out of this era of chaos and disorder, and they're going to rise up. Now, the Merovingians is a ruling family who come out of the tribe called the Franks. Franks makes sense where that name comes from, who have moved into modern day France and Germany around the year 400. The first notable of these Merovingian rulers is Clovis. He's a brutal and wily warrior who's able to rise up through the ranks of the kind of Frankish tribes, become the king, and be able to start ruling. Now, what particularly makes Clovis notable in terms of advancing our story in history is that he's going to be one of the first Germanic rulers to become Catholic. Clovis is going to seize on the order and political unity that is provided by Catholicism and the kind of structure of society that already is in there, and is going to convert to Catholicism in order to be able to kind of use that to not only prop up his rule, but again also to carry on that legacy of being by this point a Catholic ruler in the vein of a Roman emperor. Now, luckily for us to make the history of this time period a little easier in the year 2023 is that he's going to spend the last year of his life killing off any rivals to the throne, and he's going to be, which is going to very much set up the Merovingian dynasty to last pretty much unopposed for multiple generations. And by going and doing this, it allows the line of succession to be very clear and concise. And the Merovingians also are pretty lucky in that we get a pretty, for a long time, a long line of fathers who have sons, who have sons, who have sons, and it makes it an easy transition, which again also helps provide a little bit more political continuity for this time period. One of the later and next major Merovingian rulers is Charles Martel. He also goes by the name of Charles the Hammer. And his major claim to fame is that we talked about this in the last unit. As the Muslim forces have taken over Spain, as they've established the Muslim state of Al Andalus in Spain, they've crossed the um, mountains into France and have started to march their way towards Paris. And Charles Martel brings out the Frankish army, and at the Battle of Tours in 732, the Muslim armies are stopped and defeated. They retreat back into Spain, and this is a momentous moment in the history of not only France but also of Catholic Europe, because this very much keeps Christianity in Europe. Now, again, if you put yourself in the shoes of a Muslim warrior in 732, it's oh darn, we'll be back the next year. But we never see these major advances on Western Europe in the numbers and the kind of drive that we see in 732. We'll see Muslim advances over many generations in Eastern Europe, but this very much helps to keep Christianity in Europe, keep those Muslim advances still into Spain. See Clovis here on the left, and then again, importantly, a major part of becoming Catholic is the baptism. So he is baptized by the Pope, very much again tying the Germanic tribes and Christianity together. That's Charles Martel in statue form and in a painting. And again, he's famous for his defeating the Muslim forces at the Battle of Tours in 732 to help keep Christianity in Europe. Our next Merovingian ruler is Pepin the Short. You can kind of guess how tall he is if you want to go and figure that out. And Pepin is going to keep expanding the Frankish Empire that is beginning to be built through Clovis through Charles Martel, and he begins to go over the Alps in the south down into northern Italy into Lombardy, the region kind of just over the Alps. He is able to defeat the Lombards there in Italy, but remember the time period. There's no internet, there's no telephone, there's no telegraph. It's hard to be able to keep your eye out on stuff in and around your area, let alone in another country, let alone across the Alps. So Pepin, even though he goes on this campaign and defeats the Lombards, astutely recognizes that it's going to be extraordinarily hard for him to control this land. So what he does is goes and turns this land on the other side of the Alps in Italy over to the Pope in Rome. And so this is going to further cement ties between the Merovingian rulers in France and in Germany with Catholicism and the Pope. The Pope is going to turn around and anoint him with oil. And so we see the Pope coming out to meet with him, the Pope kind of giving him the blessing. And what we're seeing here is, again, the Pope using Pepin and the Merovingians to be able to provide protection for the Catholics, not only in Italy, but in Western Europe, but also the Merovingians using the Pope to be able to kind of back up their rule to give this. Why do they get to be the rule? Because again, they've been anointed by the Pope. They've been blessed by God's power. And so by anointing him with this oil, Pepin and the Merovingians become obligated to protect the Pope. And what we see here is this is, again, steps closer and closer and closer where Catholicism in Europe are going to be bound much closer together as both the political leaders of Europe and the Pope are going to, and the popes are going to recognize that they're going to use each other for their own purposes, but it's going to be a very symbiotic, a very mutually beneficial relationship if they're able to use the military and political power of the Merovingian kings as well as the religious power that is offered by the Catholic Church. So what we see here again is Pepin and the Pope kind of again going through all the pomp and circumstance here. We see in this pretty famous painting Pepin being kind of being blessed by the Pope in St. Peter's. You're going to want to go and take a look at the sons that are down below the Pope there, because that Pepin's son is going to be witnessing this moment, and we'll see what is going to happen later on because of that. So slowly over time, the Merovingians have conquered and been able to take over a large part of modern day France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Central Europe, down into even the transalpine areas on the far side of the Alps into Italy. And so this is the kind of conquests that are going to culminate under our last major Merovingian ruler, Pepin's son, Charlemagne. And Charlemagne is going to be one of the big key players early on here in the Middle Ages in Western Europe, and his legacy is going to loom large over the rest of the Middle Ages into the 1800s. We know a lot about Charlemagne because his life was chronicled by the Frankish historian Einhard in a book called The Life of Charlemagne. Einhard and Charlemagne are best buddies. Einhard follows him around and is kind of somewhat contemporaneously writing down the exploits and things that Charlemagne's doing during his life. So we can all read this book. It's pretty easily. You can kind of go and learn all about the stuff that Charlemagne's doing. From that book, we learn that Charlemagne is aggressive, he's ambitious, he's determined, and utterly ruthless in trying to accomplish his ambitious goals. We know that he is extraordinarily smart. He is very astute in not only politics and military, but as an inquiring mind, wants to learn about the world, which is very much a shift in what we've seen a little bit for the previous rulers who are very much insular, just kind of going collecting power. Charlemagne's a soldier, he's a statesman, a patron of the arts. You all know that a patron of the arts is someone who sponsors and pays for arts. If you've watched a movie, you've paid for a song. you've liked a YouTube channel, you become a patron of the arts as well, and that's something that Charlemagne supported. So we're going to talk a little bit about what he does in a couple different aspects in terms of his military accomplishments. One of the major ones, he's going to spend most of his reign fighting. So he's going to be fighting, if you pay attention, all the different directions here, with the Muslims in Spain in the west, Saxons in the north, Avars and Slavs in the east, and Lombards in Italy in the south. So lots of different fighting that he's going on in there. He's fighting with the Muslims in Spain. And again, the name of the mountain range is killing me. I can't remember it. But this is where we get the famous poem, the Song of Roland, which is going to be about Charlemagne's expedition into Spain. It doesn't work out real well. He's got to run away, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Song of Roland when we get to chivalry. But that plays a big role in that. He is important, not just be able to win battles. We've talked about a lot already in world history. We'll talk about more. Anybody can really go and win a battle. But you have to remember that the political, social, economic structure that the Romans had to be able to get troops in the field does not exist anymore. So the ability for Charlemagne to actually get people from one part of the empire to another, feed them, give them water, get them there healthy, and then go and fight is pretty amazing in and of itself. So we talk about this being called logistics. Anybody can sit on their armchair on a couch and win a battle, but being able to get your soldiers healthy, fed, and rested to these different places is really what separates the best generals from the very good ones, and Charlemagne has that in spades. We see on the left the kind of a relic of Charlemagne. He's going to get Charlemagne is French for it's the Latinized Charles Magnus or Charles the Great. So we kind of get the idea of we're taking the Latin stuff, moving into French, and coming there. That's him going and attacking various groups. On his campaigns, and we can kind of see the empire that he goes and creates that stretches at its height down into the south into Rome, up through to the English Channel, eastward into Central Europe, and then westward into Spain almost, which is pretty formidable. One of the major, again, exploits is that campaign into Spain against the very well supplied and very capable and competent Muslim armies. The campaigns don't go exactly as well as Charlemagne would like. So as he's retreating, we get the famous story of the Knight Roland, who is kind of the guarding the baggage train, the very rear end of the kind of retreating Frankish army. The Muslims are hot on his heels, and he decides at a certain mountainous pass that his knights are going to stop. He's going to tell the rest of the guys to go, and Roland and his knights very bravely fight off the Muslim army to buy enough time for Charlemagne's army to escape. And all those guys are going to die. And again, it's a pretty famous story, and this eventually will morph into a important kind of idea of what a knight should be in chivalry. We'll get to that in a couple lectures. Charlemagne's military might is well documented, but he's also very good at governing this land that he has. So you have to remember that this is a big, huge, giant area, particularly for the ability of people in this time in history to govern. So he's going to kind of use different ways of governing in order to be able to figure out the best ways to do that. So the peaceful inner regions, where he doesn't really have to worry too much about foreign invaders, are going to be ruled by counts, so he doesn't have to keep a very close eye on them. The border regions, where he's bordering up against all these people who he does not like, and they don't like him, who he's fighting, where defense was much more important, were ruled what are called margraves or border counts. They've got a little bit more freedom of action. They're not as closely watched because they can go out and kind of do what they want when they want. And then to be able to act as his eyes and ears, he has his missi dominici. These were prelate and lay nobles. So what we mean by that, these are nobles who are within the kind of hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church, as well as lay nobles, nobles who are higher up in society. through their families and through their other things, but outside of the church authority, who are sent out by Charlemagne to monitor border areas, check roads, listen to grievances, and see that justice is done. They become not only the eyes and ears of Charlemagne reporting back, but become this extension of his power. Because remember, Charlemagne is one guy. One guy can be in one place at one time, and so this kind of acts as an extension of Charlemagne's rule when he's not able to be there. In terms of religious aspects, Charlemagne is very much trying to Christianize any remaining non-Christian areas that not only is he conquering, but within his empire. He believed that he ruled himself by the grace of God, so God came down, and that's what Charlemagne, gets to rule, and why Mr. Kramer doesn't. So some actions that kind of back up the statement is that when 4,500 Saxons were captured, and given the option of joining Charlemagne's empire, with the caveat being they have to give up their pagan ways and convert to Catholicism, or they would die. The Saxons said, we choose not to. So Charlemagne had them beheaded for not converting. And the big major thing that happens with Charlemagne is that he's going to be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day in the year 800. And this is where we want to star this in our notes. This is a major important deal, not only in the history of Charlemagne's rule, but in the history of Christianity. What we see here is that Charlemagne's armies, by the year 800, pushed farther into Italy, down Lombardy, into Rome. Now, the Pope. And so the Pope is recognizing that you have a giant army led by the leading military mind of the generation advancing towards him in Rome. The Pope wants to not only have his religious power, but also his political power, not only in Rome, but in the surrounding areas. So the Pope is very astutely going to make a deal with Charlemagne to be able to kind of keep Charlemagne's army out of Rome, so he's not going to be able to loot or other stuff. And so he's able to kind of make a deal by kind of going and saying, you keep your army out of Rome. We'll cut you some other different deals here, and we don't really time to get into the ins and outs of that. But this is going to culminate in the Pope inviting Charlemagne to Christmas Mass on Christmas morning in the year 800. He's going to be in the crowd, and again, this is in St. Peter's in Rome. This is a big deal. It's all the pomp and the circumstance. And during this Mass, the Pope stops, asks Charlemagne to come up, has Charlemagne kneel before the Pope, and puts the crown of the Roman Emperor on Charlemagne. And so this is again very symbolic in a couple different ways. One, it's acknowledging Charlemagne's power, encouraging Charlemagne and say, hey, you are the Roman emperor now. You don't have to stay here in Rome. You feel free to go back to Paris or Aachen, wherever you would like to go hang out on the other side of the Alps, so the Pope can kind of stay here in Italy. But we're acknowledging your power, acknowledging your legacy of continuing the Roman Empire in there. And Charlemagne very much wants this title because, again, it's a continuation of the symbolic rule that Rome has had on everyone for such a long time. The other major act of symbolism is that it's who is doing this crowning, who is giving Charlemagne this title, who's giving Charlemagne this power of rule. It's coming from the Pope. So obviously God coming through the Pope there. So who is the only person on earth that Charlemagne still has to listen to? He still has to listen to the Pope because the Pope gave him that title. So there's a lot of symbolism. This is very heavy in terms of kind of the weight of this moment, and it's a very big deal. Again, if we're making a movie of Charlemagne's life, this is the culminating experience. This is when the music swells. This is when everyone goes silent. This is a big deal that this happens, and we'll see how similar scenes like this will play out through the rest of history, maybe when another major conqueror of Europe has a similar encounter with a pope, say in, let's just give it 1,000 years. So that's Charlemagne, again, in the traditional fleur-de-lis of what will become the French kings, in the purple color of the French crown, and then we'll see his Missi Dominici, his prelate and lay nobles, who are acting as his eyes and ears. This is the major moment, again, that happens on Christmas Day. Charlemagne called up the Pope asks him to kneel and crowns him this Holy Roman Emperor, giving him this title. This is a title that's going to last all the way into the 1800s in Central Europe. This is a major event. This is a very big deal for this to happen. This happens in St. Peter's in Rome, and you can go and visit it. Like former student Marco Heel, they're giving the thumbs up. You can go see this. You go through the major front doors, you turn to the right, you see the Pieta by Michelangelo, and you go right through the main center door. There's a circle mosaic on the floor, and instead of X marks the spot, the circle marks the spot. That is where Charlemagne was crowned at the old altar of Old St. Peter's in Rome. So this is a major deal that's still a part of Catholic history and Western European history to this day. So that's what's going on during Charlemagne's rule in terms of military, political, and religious aspects. But we also see, again, his ability to have that inquiring mind to want to learn about science. And historians kind of coin this term the Carolingian Renaissance. If you understand you're trying to run an empire, like we saw with Augustus and his bureaucracy, you need a literate bureaucracy to govern all these areas. So again, we go back to the bottom of the slide where it says Dark Ages quotation marks. This, again, time period has gotten the reputation for there's no learning, nothing's going on, everyone's dumb and stupid, when it's very much not the case. If you're trying to run this large empire, you need smart people to help you do that. So learning keeps doing that, and Charlemagne understands this. Charlemagne urged learning throughout the kingdom, and his ability to put pressure on nobles and their sons and their families to remain literate, to remain educated, is going to very much stay in the elite circles of Western and Northern European society, as well as in the clergy. And this is going to have a huge impact on Western European scientific advances through this time period of the Middle Ages. Charlemagne very much liked the area in and around the modern German city of Aachen. He's going to put one of his major palaces there, and he's going to found a school there to promote Latin learning. Why Aachen of all places? Because there's hot springs around there, and kind of think of it like a natural hot tub. You love to hang out in there, because who doesn't love hanging out in a hot tub? Uh, this Renaissance is going to kind of be continued through a network of monasteries. We'll talk more about monks and nuns and monasteries as we get through this unit. But they're going to be communicating with letters throughout Charlemagne's kingdom. It's safer to go and give this post, do that to help communicate and drive what we see learning forward. And importantly, the monks in the monasteries, the elites in the clergy are going to be saving and copying manuscripts from Rome. And this is a big deal. This is why, again, we talk about Carolingian Renaissance, maybe Renaissance with a small r rather than a big R. This is a major momentous thing because this very much saves the a lot of the classical past that we have in Western Europe. Some of it's going to be lost. It's going to remain in the East. We can get more on that later. But what we want to understand is 90% of the works that we know about Rome from the Romans today exist in their earliest forms, not in the hands of the Romans, but as a Carolingian manuscript from this time period. This is a major work of saving Roman history for humans today. This is a big deal. And this very much allows us to understand what happened during the Roman Empire. So this is a school that he has in Aachen. If you're taking a look at this as a script written from the time period, if you start to notice, this starts to look very similar to the notes that you're writing down right now. And when we're talking about the evolution of writing in English, we can talk about the Greek letters becoming the Latin letters, turning the language of the Latin Church, which becomes the letters that we have here. And we see some other forms of changes going from Roman times into this Carolingian script. It's the Carolingians who invent the idea of punctuation, of ending a sentence with a punctuation mark. And then how do you know a new sentence starts? With capital letters and lowercase letters. It's the Carolingians who come up with this. The Romans, it's all capital writing. It's all one big giant block of text with not just like a terrible freshman paper with no indentations, but with no sentence ends. It just all kind of runs together. It's the Carolingians who invent these grammatical areas that we're still using and being taught in your English classes today. Charlemagne's legacy is going to be one of, again, he's going to leave a lot of great things, but it's not going to be the most simple and easy transition into the next couple of rulers. He's going to die in 814 AD. And his son is going to be Louis the Pious. If you know what the word pious is, and you can pause and search that up on the dictionary, you know, pious is someone who's very religious. And if this is someone's nickname, they're not Louis the I'm going to go play video games all day. It's Louis the Pious. He's spending a lot of time in church being very religious, so good for him. But if he's doing that, he's not helping the empire be run together. And so we'll see this happen a lot in world history, where you have a very ambitious and expansionist father turns the keys over to the son, who's got other different ideas. And so we'll see this happen a lot. So Louis the Pious just does not have that same force to keep the empire together as his father did. And so over time, we'll see the empire start to fall apart, particularly amongst Charlemagne's grandsons, because Louis the Pious is going to have three sons who are not going to be happy about the part that their father is leaving them. So this is going to culminate in 843 at the Treaty of Verdun, where the grandsons of Charlemagne decide that they are better off not fighting each other anymore, but going and dividing his empire up into three different ways. So Charlemagne is going to create this large empire in Western Europe, the largest empire that we've seen in Western Europe since the fall of Rome in the Western Empire. And now it's going to be, within 30 years after his death, chopped up three different ways by his grandsons. Charles the Bald, who's rocking the Mr. Cranmer haircut, is going to get the eastern half of the empire, a little bit of Eastern Europe, East Germany, a little bit of Poland, your Slovenias down through there. Lothar is going to get the middle section of Charlemagne's empire, most of a little bit down to southern Denmark, middle Germany, down to Austria, a little bit of western Italy. And then Louis the German is going to get the western third of the empire, and it's a little confusing. He's Louis the German, but he's going to get most of modern day France. So this is going to be divided in one sense pretty equitably in terms of the amount of men that you're able to bring up for a military, as well as the amount of money you can make from this. But the important thing is that this empire is now divided up. And so we've gone from Rome falling in the 400s to Europe fracturing and falling apart. Charlemagne has helped pick up those pieces that have been slowly put together by his Merovingian predecessors. He creates this big giant empire, and 30 years, it all starts to go and fracture again. And we'll see this continuing fracturing and splintering of Western Europe continue even after the Treaty of Verdun. So to finish up, that's old man Charlemagne there in the center left, turning over the keys to his empire to his young son, Louis the Pious. And Louis the Pious, being very religious, spending all his time being religious, not that great of holding things together, particularly when his three sons start fighting. And so someone who's got two younger brothers, the brothers don't always get along over everything. So they're going to go and fight, and that's going to take Charlemagne's big giant empire and turn it into this at the Treaty of Verdun, where Charles the Bald is going to get the eastern third of the empire, or laser point right over here. All right, so that's Central Europe, that's Central Germany, Eastern Germany is kind of over there, down into, again, this is your Slovenias, your Austrias down over here in Bavaria. Lothar is going to get the middle third of the empire, Western Germany, that's the Netherlands, down into Eastern France, into Northern Italy, and then Louis the German is going to get that western third of most of modern day France that we have there. So this is how we're going to leave Western Europe here in 843. And we want to continue understanding of, we got a big, huge, giant empire under Charlemagne. It's now fractured into third parts. And now we'll start to see it being fractured even further with invasions by a new group of people called the Vikings.